Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about 150,000 shin plasters for free. Shin plasters. 150,000 free shin plasters that the Empire State got when they got the free dam number 230 at Ticonderoga, New York. Actually at Alexandria, or what's also known as Weedville. Dam A on the Poop Chute River. Now some people are very confused when I explain to them about the 150,000 free shin plasters, but what you got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that the dollar was kind of murdered with John Kennedy and Dealey Plaza. When they blew John Kennedy's brains all over Dealey Plaza with the shooter and the book depository and the one on the bridge overpass, and then of course we had the shooter up on the grassy knoll. The dollar, the so-called dollar, the piece of paper that you get, well, they became shin plasters in 1965. They took from the American people the last vestiges of silver in the Lyndon Baines Johnson orders of the Coinage Act of 1965. You can read his signing statement, how it's noted almost immediately in President Johnson's statement that they were changing 173 years of money law. For the first time, right after they murdered Kennedy, they were changing the money law in 1965. Now, if you understand the massive control and the massive marshaling, if you will, of the discourse in America, we are no longer a nation of free speech. We're no longer a nation of not being spied on and monitored and recorded and eavesdropped on and all of our information sold like Facebook's been doing and Google's been doing and Yahoo's been doing and all the other so-called social media. When you take a very long, close, hard look at what's actually happening in America, we've been turned into a Gestapo, GRU, KGB, CIA, FBI, police surveillance state. They're very, very, very concerned that the American public will catch on to how they're financing and running and marshaling, if you will, the oligarchy and the deep state. Now, I didn't make up the term deep state. This is something that, I don't know, maybe Donald Trump in his references to the swamp and how everything is rigged. Now, that brings us back to the free 150,000 shin plasters, which you're probably going to have to educate yourself and look up shin plasters and go to the images so that you can see them. And what you'll quickly begin to understand is that shin plasters are identical to federal, there's nothing federal about it, it's a big private club, reserve notes. The fiat paper monopoly money, and it is a monopoly, by the way, because they're the only ones that have the gall They're the only ones that have the gall to print it right out of thin air. I mean, what's in this box, right? Nothing. So let's get on to talk about the water levels. The water level litigation and the water level prosecutions that went on for over 150 years in the Empire State over Dam A, dam inventory for the Dam Safety Administration, the Dam Safety Administration number 230 at the Poop Chute River. For over 150 years, the state, the Empire of New York, was engaged in numerous civil prosecutions and even a couple of criminal prosecutions over the mill pond operations of the water levels on Lake George. Up and down, up and down, up and down the lake levels go as they're flushing away all the contaminated leachate-ridden waters of Lake George. In other words, they're dumping the big toilet lake into the Poop Chute River and flushing all that phosphate and nitrates over to Lake Champlain. They're flushing their commode and sending it down the Poop Chute River over in front of Fort Ticonderoga. Now, the state of New York argued for years that the dam site, the property that the dam was built on, belonged to the state of New York. The control of it belonged to the state of New York and nobody else. Nobody else was supposed to have any control over how Lake George is emptied into the Poop Chute River. This is the position that the lawyers for the Empire State took for over 150 years. Now, the lowering and raising and lowering and raising and lowering and raising of the lake level in the winter time and in the early spring when the ice is still on the lake, that ice going up and down was causing massive property damages, and the excessively high waters flooded as much as 5,000 acres of land, mostly in northern Queensbury, Warren County, New York, the records of which were created, excuse me, not by me. I didn't create these records. They were created by the prosecutors of Warren County when they indicted Joseph Weed and Alexander Baldwin, I guess his name was, Alexandra Baldwin, of the Baldwin lines, the steamship lines, and Weed, he was involved with the steamships and the railroads there at Ticonderoga and Baldwin's Landing, actually. So, let's see. The state of New York's flushing its polluted water. Lake George is flushing its polluted water into the Poop Chute River. And the Lake George Park Commission and the Lake George Association and the Fund for Lake George and the Darren Freshwater Institute and RPI University and the Environmental Conservation Department of the state of New York knows doggone well, along with the Post-Star, the Albany Times-Union, and the Troy Record, and the Lake George Mirror, let's not forget the Lake George Mirror, that they're flushing the contaminated waters of Lake George into the Poop Chute River and then on over to the area right in front of Fort Ticonderoga. And they're dumping a huge amount of pollution from the Hudson River down the Glens Falls Feeder Canal and into the Champlain-Hudson Canal, the canal that runs from the Hudson River up to Lake Champlain there at Whitehall, or also known as South Bay. So the state of New York's position is that they controlled the lake. The dam was built on their property, and they had a right to operate and control the dam. And then international power and Paper Corporation gave 150,000 shin plasters and a free dam. They gave the dam for free after millions and millions of dollars in property damages all over Lake George were complained about by the state, the Empire. The Empire complaining about all the property damages all over the Lake George Basin. And then, of course, the massive poisoning of Lake Champlain, which, just by the way, is a New York State and a Vermont state lake. It's a New York lake. So this massive dumping of all this contaminated and polluted water, plus the massive mill wastes, the massive contamination of Lake Champlain by International Paper Corporation, millions of cubic yards of humid sewage and industrial waste dumped right in front of Fort Ticonderoga on the bottom of the lake. And ladies and gentlemen, so far I'm hitting all the scientific evidence spot on. I'm being very accurate in what I'm saying in this video. Now here's the problem. You've got the taxpayers of the state of Vermont and the taxpayers of the state of New York that are getting hung with the bill to clean up Lake Champlain and Lake George, while the banks that were owned basically by International Paper Company, Glens Falls Paper, Ticonderoga Paper, Lake George Paper, and International Paper, the big paper mills and the big mining operations that operate in New York, they're the ones that cause the pollution, along with the village of Ticonderoga, New York. Ticonderoga, New York used the Poop Chute River as an open sewer, like the state of New York and many cities and villages and towns use the Hudson River as an open sewer. Now here's where we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. We're supposed to create this big Adirondack Park to protect the water supplies for the rest of the state. That's the whole concept behind the creation of the Adirondack Park. But wait a second, we're protecting the water and at the same time we're using the water as an open sewer, as a septic tank, a cesspool. We're supposed to be protecting the waters. That's the Adirondack Park legislation of the late 1800s. We must create this giant park to protect the water for the downstate cities like New York City and like Poughkeepsie and Albany, and they're protecting the water for consumption by human beings. So we have to have this giant park in the Adirondack Mountains. And at the same time, we're using the Hudson and the Mohawk and the Niagara, and we're using Champlain and the St. Lawrence, and we're using the Lachute, the Poop Chute River, the giant open sewers. So something's not washing here. I think somebody's got their stories backwards. Somebody's running one heck of a racket involving the so-called water protection, environmental protection operations, because we're not protecting anything except the right of the great big corporations and the cities, the villages, and the towns, and the state of New York itself to dump huge amounts of sewage and garbage and all kinds of toxins and hazardous wastes into the waters of the state of New York. You know, I know that sounds like I've got it mixed up, but when you look take a hard look into the subject matter, you'll find out that I'm not getting it wrong at all. I've got it 100% accurate. Now, there's some people that would try to attack my character, and hell, there's people running around trying to tell people I'm delusional and crazy. But if I'm so delusional and crazy, take a visit to the poisoning of Lake Champlain and take a visit to the poisoning of Lake George. These are historical document compilations, excuse me, and the records and photographs and videos of everything that I'm discussing in this particular video. And ask yourself one question. How is it that these matters wound up in the United States Supreme Court in 1974? How is it that the state of New York received from International Paper Corporation at the time of the conclusion of the litigation in the Supreme Court of the United States? Excuse me, I'm looking for something here. How is it at the end of all that litigation, the state of New York gives 150,000 free shin plasters? They give them 7 acres of land right there on Lake George, and they give the state of New York a free dam after decades and decades of extremely expensive litigation and criminal prosecutions over this up and down, up and down, up and down ice sheet in the winter and early spring on Lake George. Now, to Ellen Apperson Brown and to the Lake George Park Association there, the Lake George Park Commission, Tom West, let's not leave Tom West of the West Law Firm out of this, and that jolly old gang of Lake George elitists that are on the Lake George Association. Why is it that everything in this video that I'm discussing is historically accurate? Why is it that C.J. Woodbury and good old Charlie Tuttle, and I can name a whole bunch of other very prominent names from all over Glens Falls, Queensbury, and Warren County that have been involved in these matters, and point you to all the court records and the court transcripts, and wow, there's all kinds of material from the state legislature. And then of course you had I guess his name was Paul Schaefer, and from the I can't remember the name of that stupid college, Union College, there we go, Union College, RPI University, Colgate, Cornell University. Cornell University's been involved in this forever, along with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Supreme Court. Now the courts of the state of New York and the U.S. Supreme Court have been involved in everything that I'm discussing in this video. And to end this one up, because I've only got so much time and battery, the massive dumping of huge amounts of water, the massive dumping of huge amounts of sewage destroyed the Witham Marina, massively destroyed the Witham Marina on Lake George. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it right there, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. We're on the docket. We're on the docket in U.S. Supreme Court, so we'll see how this court case goes. As always, hasta la vista, God bless, and you betcha, we will be back.